Happy New Year, everyone, and welcome to the very first podcast of 2024. This is the Mastering Miles podcast powered by Bioendurance PT and Performance. My name is Matt Ferlindis, and I am a physical therapist in the Milwaukee area that specializes in treating runners and running injuries. I'm very excited for this episode because I'm going to be chatting with one of my best friends, Noah Bernhardt, who is a physical therapist and very experienced endurance athlete himself. We are going to be discussing goal setting for 2024. Setting up proper goals is important for peak performance, as is having someone to chat with about your goals and the way you want your season to go. That's why I'm very much looking forward to broadcasting this conversation, because Noah and I constantly have these conversations with each other. So I'm looking forward to being able to broadcast this episode to give some insight into what our conversations are like overall when relating to goal setting. As always, if you are enjoying the episodes, feel free to like and subscribe on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and leave us a review. I would really appreciate that. And with that, let's get into our goal setting conversation with Noah. What's up, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast for this very special first episode of 2024. I have with me one of my best friends from PT school and beyond, Mr. Noah Bernhardt. Noah, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, my name's Noah. I'm a physical therapist in the Southern California area. And like Matt said, we're BFFs that go way back, PT school, bonded over running, cycling. I think we first met when it was a rainy day and I couldn't ride my bike back from the library, and Matt was kind enough to give me a ride, and that's where it all began. Sparks flew, and here we are now, almost 10 years later, and Matt's crushing it with his podcast, and I'm super stoked to be here.
Awesome. Thanks, Noah. I still remember that day vividly. And I also still remember the first 50-mile bike ride that you took me on and how I absolutely bonked and overheated for like the last 10 miles. And we have this epic picture of like me lying on the ground, just absolutely exhausted. First time I ever rode 50 miles on the bike. So I always think of that on my long bike rides.
Man, that I remember that. I felt so bad because I remember we had this big plan to go to downtown Milwaukee, and that was like, yeah, just at the 25-mile turnaround when we got to the lakefront. I just remember like speeding down, what is that, like Wisconsin Avenue, I think, and there's all these like cobble roads and just like a ton of traffic. And like it was just a brutal first like 50 miler, but look at you now, like
Yeah.
just destroying Ironmans and going for 100+ mile rides on the
I,
reg.
I don't know if destroying is the right word, but I appreciate that. I appreciate that encouragement there.
Yeah, man, you're doing awesome.
So this episode is, with it being the start of 2024, always a lot of talk about goals, and that's exactly what this episode is going to be about. All about setting our goals up for the year and kind of how we follow them and everything like that. And the reason I asked Noah to be on is, of course, we have been really good friends ever since PT school. And honestly, we always have these conversations with each other, no matter when we get together, when we chat, we're always chatting about kind of what our goals are, discussing self-improvement. And I think it's pretty useful to have somebody that you can share those conversations with in order to constantly improve yourself. So I'm kind of pumped that we get to actually broadcast this conversation, since a lot of times we have these conversations anyways.
Yeah, me too. It feels like a really great, like natural kind of annual kind of recap, but also forecasting into the new year. So
Yeah.
thank you for always being a sounding board and a buddy in all these endeavors that we go through.
Back at you, Noah. So speaking about recap, how did your 2023 go overall, Noah? Kind of what did you accomplish? I know you had a lot of races this year, so how did it all go and what did you learn from it?
Yeah, it was really good. Looking back, it happened so fast, and there's definitely a lot of things that went on. So, yep, in February, I did the American Birkebeiner, which is a 31-mile cross-country ski race. Second time doing it, and I got a PR by about 10 minutes, which was great. My goal for that one was just to not cramp up at the end because the first time I did it, like my muscles were seizing and it was just brutal, a brutal finish, probably one of the worst finishes of any endurance event ever. So that was a great success. And then after that, I did Grandma's Marathon with you, Matt.
Hmm.
And that was not the best success for me. It was definitely my slowest marathon, but it was super fun. And I definitely encouraged me to get out there and do it again. An event I would love to do at least one more time in my lifetime. But I think my biggest takeaway from that race was just the importance of tapering. Because I did like a series of 20-mile like long runs. I think I did a 20-mile long run like 3 consecutive weeks before that. And so I had like a 2 week taper. So it was like 20 mile, 20 mile, 20 mile, and then I think maybe like 10 miles, and then 10 miles, and then the race. So it's just like I think I overtrained for that. Um, but
Do you think your legs were like a bit fatigued going into it with all of those 20-mile runs in the bank for you personally?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, they definitely did not feel fresh. They did not feel fresh at all. And I remember chatting with you. The other thing too was I'm a big fan of yerba mate for like races and stuff. It's kind of always been my like go-to. But I remember like getting to the starting line of that race after drinking my yerba mate, and like my resting heart rate was already like 100 something. And I was like, oh gosh, this is not good. So I think it was, yeah, leg fatigue, um, just not not proper tapering, and then also um, yeah, I think too, just kind of the fatigue of travel because I was coming from California, and just kind of being in a foreign land, and there was a lot of socializing beforehand. Staying in the dorms, I know Matt, you and I shared the dorm with our significant others, so it's just the four of us in this tiny little two-person dorm. Like we were both squeezed into uh little twin beds, and I
I've
don't
told
think
so
anyone
many
slept well that night.
I've told so many people the story about how we just all like crammed into that dorm room, but hey, it got the job done. Maybe not as super effective as we'd hoped for, but it was quite the experience.
I had a blast. I felt like I was in college again. I was like ready to, sneak a beer into the dorm and have a great time. Thankfully, we didn't. That would have really made for an even worse race.
Yeah, that is
But I thought it was
indeed.
fun.
Yeah, it definitely was. And I think that just goes along with the whole grandma's marathon atmosphere. Like the course was awesome. The people were great. A lot of people like traveled in from it. So it was just kind of a cool environment and race setting for it. So I agree. It's definitely a marathon I want to do in the future again.
Oh my gosh, yeah. The hype, I think what really added to it was just the hype of everyone that I talked to about it. As a PT, we are having small talk and conversations with patients all day. And it would inevitably kind of come up what my plans were for the summer. And so even then, like I had patients like tell me about it. And then that got me really, really stoked. And kind of a recurring theme amongst the people that I talked to that ended up being true was there was like this one lone trombone player like halfway through the race that was just all by himself playing the trombone, all these different like pump up songs. And I just thought that was like the coolest, coolest like race feature ever.
Yes, I remember
Definitely
running
lived up to
past
the
that
hype.
and I was like, this is amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, because I guess he's there every year. Keeping the tradition alive, which is great. Yeah, so Grandma's was good. And then after that, I did the Tour de Big Bear, which is a 100-mile bike ride in the mountains of Big Bear, California. So that was challenging because it started at 7,000 feet of elevation and then it got all the way up to 9,000 feet. So it's like a cumulative like 7,000 foot gain throughout the 100-mile race. And I was just not ready for that altitude, but it was definitely a good learning experience of like how to kind of prepare for that. Um, there were a lot of aid stations that had cold towels that you could like put on your neck as well. That was the other factor too, is that it was in like early August. And so in Southern California, it gets pretty hot. Like I think it was like 85 degrees at that time. So it was just a really hot day at elevation. And so those cold towels made a huge difference. So definitely going to load up on those uh, whenever I'm in a hot endurance race.
It's those little tips that are helpful to like learn of like, yeah, last time I used that and that was great.
I know. Yeah, yeah. And the one thing, it's so true. Those little things make a huge difference. Anyone who's done the Berkey with me will know that I'm a huge fan of pickle juice now. Huge pickle juice proponent. Was trying to like get everyone in my group to do them with me last time. Didn't have any takers, but they'll know. They'll find out one day how great it is.
Maybe this year at the Berkey.
Yeah, this is the year I can feel it. Everyone's gonna have their Camelback full of pickle juice. Gonna be just getting as much as they can. It's gonna be great. Yeah, so then after that, I did another 100-miler, the Tour de Foothills, also in Southern California. And so that one went along like the foothills of the San Gabriel Mountains, so just east of LA. Um, and that was just beautiful. It was like perfect weather, 70 degrees and sunny. I got a flat like at mile 15, but super easy to fix. And then was able to get to the aid station to get a full pump up on my tire. And there were like burgers and hot dogs and pizza at all the aid stations. It was like the most unhealthy fueling I've ever done in my life, but it was so much fun.
What do you think, Noah, or what do you feel like was like the difference between like a really big marathon race and then two bike century rides? Like what was like different between those two? Like what was different in preparation other than like obviously you're running versus being on the bike, but also like what was different during the race and how you raced and everything?
I think just the amount of time. For me, marathons have typically, I guess the grandma's marathon took me, I think it was like 3 hours and 25 minutes or 3 hours and 30 minutes, somewhere around there. And the Big Bear bike ride was like 6 hours and 40 minutes. So it was just like the sheer volume of time. I'm also a much like faster runner than cyclists. So just trying to build up endurance and speed for that was a little more challenging. I didn't really focus on speed at all though. It was really more so just trying to get those miles and hours under my belt. Fueling was definitely a big part of that too. Just experimenting with like goos and what I really enjoyed is actually Fig Newton bars. That's kind of my go-to now. Um, and we have at my work, they give us like free Kind bars. And so I also am a big fan of Kind bars as well. Those really seem to perk me up on my ride.
Awesome. Yeah, you can't pass stuff like that up when it comes for free, for sure.
Oh yeah, that's my favorite. It tastes better when it's free. I don't know what it is.
So with all of those races that you did, like there's a lot of variety there. You know, you did cross country skiing, marathon, two century rides. What is like your big takeaway, overarching theme that you learned kind of from the year overall?
I think to spread out events a little more, or maybe not spread them out, but maybe just be more intentional about rest and relaxation. I guess I just find a lot of joy in exercise. And so it's kind of my daily routine. I get up, I eat my breakfast, and I go work out, whatever that may be, like running, lifting, cycling. And I guess with my job and with California traffic, my sleep time is a little bit less than I would like. So I think just prioritizing that a little bit more would keep me fresher and able to perform at a higher level, hopefully.
That's a good takeaway. I
Yeah.
mean, those are always important things, and recovery is one of those like really big things that I think a lot of people can do better on, especially in the endurance field of it. And I think we're learning so much more about why recovery and all of that is kind of so important for us, but it's always something that we can probably constantly improve on and get better at. We'll get into some process goals a little bit later, but that's one of my big process goals related to recovery and sleep and all of that. It's just an area that we definitely need to be hitting and constantly improving on as runners and endurance athletes.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the best points you've made in an earlier podcast was just how sleep is like the one of the best performance enhancers that we're aware of. Just getting like a solid at least 7, ideally 8 hours of sleep per night can just really go a long way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. And kind of going off of that, like we're talking about like recapping 2023, and when Jack and I were talking about sleep, we were talking about just trying to be consistent with it. And that was kind of my own big takeaway from 2023 is just how important consistency is in terms of like consistency of training, consistency of sleep, whatever it may be, even in like career and business, with like starting bioendurance, it's been all about trying to be as consistent as possible on so many different things. And so I think that was my biggest takeaway from 2023 is just trying to be consistent with your training. And it's not about trying to, do big things on a daily basis, but just trying to improve a little by little by little every single day. And each workout doesn't have to be an absolute, I got 100% better with that workout, but just getting 1 to 2% better each and every time is just so important. And I think it's a lot healthier that way too, instead of trying to take big swings at it.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, just chipping away at things. I always like to think of the movie Shawshank Redemption. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie,
Yes, one of
but
my
that's kind of,
favorites.
oh my gosh, yeah, that always gets me super pumped up. I remember some like dark nights in PT school where I just pop that movie on and be like, all right, I can do this. But anyway, what he does in that movie, he just like over years, he just like chips away through the tunnel and then he's finally able to break free. Spoiler alert for people who haven't seen Shawshank Redemption. I guess I should have said that first, but yeah, that's that's what I always think of when it comes to like big things like this, because you can't just do it all at once. It really does take a little bit every day.
Yeah, 100%. So, speaking of that, we kind of recap the 2023. So, going into 2024, like what are your big goals for the year, Noah?
Sure. So I have the Berkey coming up again here in February. That's another traveling race for me. So I'll be flying back to Wisconsin to do that. So yeah, definitely learned a lot from the traveling to Minneapolis for grandma's marathon. So I think the key with that is to kind of get in a little bit more rhythm. I think I'll give myself a little more time to get there and kind of settle in, so that it's not like a big rush and maybe not put as much socialization on my plate beforehand, which will be tough because I'll be home and I'll want to see everyone. But that definitely was tough last time, just kind of that, like, I guess, social exhaustion from like hanging out with so many people. So yeah, Berkey's a big one. I'm really excited to see that crew. Um, and with that, the goal, performance goal is to just finish because in Southern California, we don't really have as much access to cross-country skiing down here. There is one place, but it relies on natural snow, which makes it a little tough because you're just kind of dependent on the weather. There's no place that makes snow like in the Midwest. But process goal for that is to just take advantage when there is snow and I have a free weekend to just get out there and grind.
Awesome.
And
Awesome.
so, yeah, yeah,
I,
yeah.
I like it. What other races or events do you have this year?
Yeah, so after the Berkey, I'm going to do the Tour to Big Bear again. That'll be in August. And that I'm really hoping to get in the mountains and train a lot more so I can get a little more adjusted to the altitude, get up those RBCs, those red blood cells a little bit more. And then hopefully finish like sub 6 hours and 15 minutes. So
Awesome.
shaving about half hour off that time would be great. I suppose another like process goal with that, I don't know if it'd be process or performance, but my drivetrain on my bike is looking pretty rough, and I think that might be slowing me down a little bit. So I'm hoping to learn some mechanical skills in order to do some replacements on there.
Have you been like maintaining it, oiling the chain and cleaning it off and all that kind of stuff with it? Or is it just
Not
starting to fall
as
apart?
Oh, I not as much as I should. I like just cleaned the chain the first time this year. I cleaned it like, man, maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And oof, it took forever. It was so gross. It was so grimy, so dirty. And then I was just looking at like some of the different wheels. There's like a jockey wheel and like the teeth of my crankset and stuff. And those are just like super worn down. And so it might be time. It might be time just to toss a new set on there.
There you go. I think they say you might want to do that. Like I think there's like a certain number of miles you're supposed to re-oil the chain. It's blanking on me right now, but yeah, I'll have to find that and send that to you so you can get that chain maintenance in order.
Ah, man, it's huge. It's huge. That friction, it adds up. It adds
Yeah.
up over time.
It does. It does. Those are pretty good, solid performance goals. And I guess we should kind of define that too a little bit. So like there's been like a number of different like studies like kind of looking more specifically at what goals are, and they kind of split it up like specifically into like three types of goals. So like one type would be like an outcome goal, or like let's say it's my goal to finish first in my age group. That would be like an outcome goal because it's based off place. Performance goal would be more time related. So like for you with the Tour de Big Bear, it would be, getting close to that 6:15. That would be more of a performance goal and like covering a certain distance in a certain amount of time. And then, kind of narrowing down even further, there is what's called a process goal. And essentially, that's kind of like what you were mentioning before of like how you are going to accomplish your performance goal. So it's like, how often am I going to train? When am I going to get out there? What is my volume going to be? How much sleep am I going to get? It's all of the factors that kind of go into that in terms of like how you are actually going to accomplish that performance goal overall. So it's kind of interesting because that's the first time, looking at that research that I've actually thought about goal setting and kind of processing it in those three different categories. But I think it's useful to distinguish in between types of goals and like, am I setting myself up for performance goals, outcome goals, process goals? What exactly are we setting ourselves up for?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I know that a lot of the research points to process goals being the way to go. And as endurance athletes, and I guess athletes in general, we typically fixate on those performance goals and outcome goals, which can kind of be detrimental. I know Matt shared an article with me that basically just kind of highlighted some of the cognitive effects, like increased anxiety and some of the other detrimental effects that come along with that pressure of trying to achieve those goals.
Hmm.
Um, and one thing, oh, go ahead, Matt.
And it was, I think it was Williamson et al. Of 2022, and we can post that in the show notes. But yeah, they mentioned on there with like a full meta-analysis, systematic review that the goal that had the largest effect on overall performance was actually process goals. So it wasn't, performance goals or outcome goals. It was actually those little process goals that we set up for ourselves that had the largest effect on overall performance.
Yeah, yeah. So that really hopefully will shift the focus to the process. And I know that's kind of a cliche in some places, that old saying of just trusting the process. But it seems like there's definitely some truth to that.
I think there's still some like really good um I think there's good value into like setting up whether it is a performance goal or outcome goal. And I think even in the study, performance goals beat out outcome goals. But it's like you also want that like long-term view and like long-term approach to know like what you're going towards. Because like you can say like I want to run so many miles a week, I want to get so much sleep, but like what is that goal leading you to? And for you, it is, finishing the Berkey and doing 6:15 with the Century ride that you're going to do. And for me, my personal big 2024 performance goal is it's Ironman year for me with Ironman Wisconsin coming up in September. And my big goal is doing sub 12 hours in the Ironman. And so I think we need that overarching goal and that big goal in order to kind of align what direction we're setting. So I think there's really, really good value to that for sure, because that's just going to set our sails, so to speak, for the direction that we want to travel and the direction that we want to go to help actually achieve that.
Yeah, for sure. One add-on to that too is there's a great Huberman Lab episode that outlines all the different tools that you can use to help set and achieve goals. And one of the big ones was like setting lofty goals. And I think the term he used was one that kind of like induces arousal, like kind of makes you feel a little nervous about. Um, because otherwise, if it's too easy, then it's like, what's the point? Like, this isn't really something I need to be working towards and dedicating a lot of mental and physical energy towards. So you
Hmm.
really have to be pushing yourself in a way. And I think that's where those outcome or performance goals help to set that target and give you a good focal point.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that too, because when you shared that podcast with me, I was thinking about my own goals for 2024, and it was very easy for me to be like, if I just get a PR in the Ironman, a PR could be 2 minutes. And so then I was listening to how it's important to set that lofty goal, that goal that is a little bit more reaching, makes you a little bit more nervous. And so I was like, you know what? No, we're going sub 12. That's going to be the goal that I'm going to set. And that just kind of drives it a little bit more to it. So I think those are two really good tips of like number one, setting a really good overarching goal for the year and probably limiting it to, and I think if we set too many goals for ourselves, um, we're just going to kind of be spread out a little bit too much. And then number two is really trying to make that as lofty of a goal as possible while still something that you can definitely see yourself attaining overall.
For sure. Yeah. You don't want to make something like unrealistic where you're like really overstretching yourself and sacrificing other aspects of your life. You don't want to, ruin other things just to just to achieve that one goal. You kind of have to keep that balance. And so, the more experience you have, the better you are at making those realistic goals. And so that's why it's so helpful to look back and see where you've come from and what you've accomplished in the last year. And I'm curious, Matt, like how did your year go in 2023? What were some of your big goals and accomplishments and how'd it go?
So my year wasn't exactly what I planned it to be, without a doubt. It started off with grandma's, which went great. I had a really, really good PR, and the goal was to not blow up during the race, essentially. So to have like more of an evenly run marathon, because that's something that I've never done before. My past two marathons have been like really, really crazy positive splits, just from kind of blowing up in the later stages of the race. But I actually ran really even run and a negative split as well. So that was a little bit of a pat on my back in terms of like proper pacing and proper setup for that. Obviously, the goal was to do Ironman this past year, except I ended up getting sick in July. And so I had to shut down training, and so that goal wasn't achievable anymore, which was kind of a tough pill to swallow for sure. But I know as endurance athletes, we've all probably been there before. And that's really where I really kind of picked up the idea and the lesson of consistency, because obviously there was something in my training that just kind of went off. And I think it was looking back on it, I think it was more of my own recovery and not being as consistent with things as I probably should have been, which probably led to my immune system being a little bit more weakened from the race. And as a result of that, coming down with some sort of sickness or illness that kind of put me out for the rest of the year. So that was the biggest thing. So I didn't get to race as much as I would have liked in 2023, but that's what 2024 is for.
Yeah, yeah. And I really like that reflection and that looking back. And I'm curious, like, what would you have done differently in terms of recovery and rest? And what might like that process look like for you?
Yeah, so May and June were two great months for me, but two more stressful months for me looking back on it. And I think that was the difference maker because May and June we had like the final push to grandma's. So training was going really, really hard and trying to get the volume. And training, I think, went really well. I think that I did that in a very, very smart way where I didn't take any huge jumps in weekly mileage or anything crazy like that. However, May and June was actually when I was starting bioendurance, getting the clinic set up, getting everything off the ground running. And so I think because of that, there was a decent amount of stress going on in my life. Not bad stress per se, but just a lot of stress and anxiety related to that and all of the changes that were going on with starting a business, with having a different schedule, with getting things set up, everything of that nature. And so I think the stress kind of had an impact on me. And I think because of that stress and because of everything that was going on, I did not place as much emphasis on recovery, on getting quality sleep, on getting quality rest days. So I think that was probably looking back the downfall for myself and like what ended up kind of making me more susceptible to illness.
Yeah, that's a really good point that you bring up too, because we often think about just the physical load of running, but we don't really think about the cognitive load of running and the cognitive load that we undertake with other aspects of our life, with work, relationships, business, starting something new. I can totally relate to that with the starting. I didn't start my own business, but I started a new job. Just I guess it was a month and a half, or no, it was a month before grandma's marathon too. And I didn't even think about that until just now. That probably played a role in that performance. Um, so I'm curious though, like, how do you monitor that? Like, how do you take stock of where you're at? And how do you like recognize when you're kind of pushing yourself beyond your limits, not from like a physical standpoint necessarily, because we have Strava, we have different ways of like measuring our physical load. But how do we like take stock of our mental load and like our stress load?
So I'm really glad you brought that up because you just jostled my brain for a study that I found earlier this year that was literally about this subject. I believe the study was by Saw et al. In the British Journal of Sports Medicine back in 2016, and the s- title of the article was Monitoring the Athlete Training Response, Subjective Self-Reported Measures Trump Commonly Used Objective Measures. And essentially, the test was looking at specifically, like, what do we look like to figure out how we are recovering? Should we look at our resting heart rate? Should we look at like heart rate variability, like all of those things that you mentioned? Or should we go more off of subjective or how we feel in terms of our energy, anxiety, or depression, fatigue, mood? And honestly, what the study found was subjective measures perform better when measuring an athlete's response to training and their well-being. So honestly, and this occurred both with acute training or like how you feel today after a workout, as well as like chronic training loads. And I thought that was super profound to know because we have all this technology, but really kind of what it can come down to is like assessing how you're feeling. Like, are you feeling more low energy? Do you feel more tired? Do you feel more anxious? Or do you feel more stressed? Are you sleeping as well? And if you're answering the negative on all of those questions, then your body probably is not in an opportune state to take in all of the training load and to take in all of that training. And it might be a good time to put more stock into rest and recovery and putting more emphasis in specifically how you feel, instead of trying to push it and ending up injured or sick. And that's what the study ended up finding was like there was more of an injury risk, when those measures of well-being and how we're feeling fatigued were more towards the negative side of things.
Wow, that's awesome. That's super helpful. So would that be just like a like you wake up in the morning and then you just kind of go through those questions and depending on what your answer is, kind of adjust your load or your training regimen based on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are some different questionnaires you can take, but honestly, what the study was said is like, yeah, how do you feel? Like, do you feel like you got good sleep? Do you feel stressed? Do you feel anxious? All of those things. And so I think it's just one thing to take stock in. And, if people are really into their training logs and journals and like keeping track of how they feel, you know, I don't think we necessarily need to like upend our training if we're just not feeling good one day, of course. But if there is a big life change, like both of us had this year with starting a business, moving across the country, starting a new job, all of those things, that might be something to take into account. And I think looking back, I probably did not take as big I didn't take that into account this year with my training. I was just more of like, yeah, all this stuff is changing in my personal life and in my career and in my profession, but I'm just gonna keep training the same way I was.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's a lot of the endurance athlete's mindset is just grinding through and just
Hmm.
pushing through and having that grit. And I feel like it's such a delicate balance of like, is this really progressing my um, ability to perform and to participate in the sport, or is it hindering it? And that's just such a hard question to answer and to gauge whether or not what we're doing is really helping or is it hurting? Because there's
Hmm.
definitely times to grit and grind, and there's definitely times to rest. And so it's helpful to have those kind of check-in tools to have at your disposal to
Hmm.
gauge that.
And this has come up a couple of times in the podcast, but it's also helpful to have someone that you can bounce ideas off of and bounce how you're feeling off of, whether it is a coach or a close friend or whatever it may be, and just being like, hey, this is how I feel. I want to keep pushing, but is it smart for me to keep pushing?
Hmm.
And that type of thing. I was a few weeks back, it was maybe like 6 or 7 weeks ago. I was running in Lapham Peak and doing a nice trail run. It was a beautiful Sunday. Like it was 50 degrees, great fall day, leaves all over. But because the leaves were all over the trail, I couldn't see any of the ruts in the ground, and I ended
Oh
up spraining my
no.
ankle fairly badly. And like
Ooh.
any distance runner, I kept running. And so even though the ankle was like a little bit sore and whatnot, and then I had to like go back to my mind of like, okay, what would I tell a patient to do? And so I ended up calling my wife, Megan, who is also a physical therapist. And I essentially just said on the phone of like, I just need you to tell me that I shouldn't run anymore. And for the state of my ankle, I should not run anymore. And she was like, yes, just walk back to your car and drive home. And I was like, thank you. That's all I needed to hear because honestly, if I had not have heard that, I probably would have just tried to keep running and would have tried to finish my workout.
Oh my gosh, this is so good, Matt. Yeah, I am so guilty of that. Yeah. Oh, I feel so bad because, as physical therapists, we're the typically the sounding board for people. We're the ones that people come to give them that kind of advice. And I think that, at least for me, I feel like I can just DIY my own rehab and my own like training programs and stuff. But you really can't. Like you
Hmm.
really don't know what you don't know. And it's really hard to see those blind spots. And I think that's where having a supportive partner or coach or someone that's a little more informed or just more familiar with maybe your moods and how you are when you're fatigued and when you are high energy to give you that feedback can be really, really valuable.
Agreed. It's really hard to make those decisions for yourself and to like be I don't know if humble is the right word, but to like, just pull it back in that moment. It's really hard to pull back when you just want to keep pushing ahead.
Yeah, yeah, that's so true. And especially when it's like your hobby and it's such a strong habit to just get out there and work out every day. And like they always say, like physical therapists always say that runners are the hardest to rehab just because they just want to get out there and run and they will just grind through like the toughest injuries. And sometimes that's just not the best thing to do. And that's really hard to recognize.
Agreed. Agreed. I think that's something that we all probably need to work on, but that's also at the same time, that's what kind of bonds us together as runners and makes us runners too at the same time.
Yeah, yes, yep. We're a strong crew, strong group of people for sure.
So,
So,
yeah, go for it, Noah.
oh, sorry, I was just wondering if there were any other races or anything else from 2023 that's stuck out at you or that you wanted to recap.
I think those were the big things for me. And, the end of this year has just been about getting on a consistent training plan and getting on just building a base and kind of building up that consistency a little bit of like dealing with coming out of the sickness back in because I was sick in July and honestly I didn't feel normal in my training again until September. So from September and like building that aerobic base, and then I had to take another little dip after my ankle injury, but back strong after that again. So, yeah, it's just like I said, it's been about a lot of that consistency and kind of resetting my sights to 2024 and like setting up my goal setting in more of a proper way than I have before with all of this new learning that I've done. And like we said, we've set a big goal, we've set a really, really lofty goal, in terms of the next year. And the next stage of that we've already hinted at is setting up those process goals specifically, of like, how we are going to get those done and what systems we are going to use to get those done. And Noah, have you read the book Atomic Habits by James Clear?
Oh, huge fan. I
Yeah.
recommend that to patients on like a daily basis. I've given it out as gifts like multiple times. Yeah, huge fan of that book.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a
very,
great
very
book.
helpful.
It's a great book, and one of my favorite quotes from it, and I think this sums up this stage of our conversation really nicely, is he says, "You do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems." And I think that's really profound and speaks to process goals itself because I'm not necessarily going to rise just super easily to doing a sub 12-hour Ironman. I am going to kind of fall back on what my daily habits are, what my daily routines are. And a lot of that relates to our process goals and the process goals that we set up for ourselves. And like, what systems do we have in place so that I can achieve that sub 12 time of the Ironman? Or that you can achieve that a 6 hour, 15-minute time with the Century ride. In relation to that, have you set up any main like process goals for yourself overall, Noah?
Well, now that I'm thinking about the reflecting on like our rest and recovery, I think just checking in with my partner, maybe even with like coworkers, people that I see every day that kind of like know when I'm higher energy, when I'm lower energy. I think too, it would be helpful to work with a coach. I guess one other goal that I didn't mention that I'm hoping to do is to run another marathon, and that will be the Big Bear Marathon. Um, and that's in November. And so it's been a long time goal of mine to qualify for Boston. So hoping to do it with that. And I think working with a coach would be really helpful. So I think I'm going to definitely work uh work with a coach, but also um reach out to a coach and do some like coaching research. I know you've had some great coaches on your podcast. I guess it would be helpful to work with someone a little more local here in Southern California, but we'll see. We'll see what ends up happening. So in terms of process goals, doing the daily check-ins, um, working with a coach, having that process that they've kind of laid out. Building up to that, I guess just doing like 1 2 to 3 hour long endurance event per week, whether that be a run or a bike ride.
I like how you define
Yeah.
that endurance event too. So it doesn't like just tie you to like run. If your like legs are feeling like fatigued and it just doesn't feel like running. So I think that's a good level of flexibility to allow yourself like either, a long bike ride, long run, something to keep that aerobic system going. So I think that's a great one.
Yeah, yeah, and I think too, with those goals just being so far out, I know one of the tips that the Huberman podcast alluded to was just to do goals in like 3 month periods. So, I have that goal that's kind of in the distance. And so right now, I think the best process I can do without getting into the nitty-gritty of, daily mileage and things like that is just kind of keeping that consistent aerobic base up, and just being flexible and doing kind of alternating between the running and the cycling will help me with both of those things. And also with the Berkey too coming up here, because I don't really have snow to ski on just yet down here. So yeah. How about you, Matt? What are some of your process goals that you're hoping to follow through with?
So, I've been thinking about this probably for the last like week or so, and with the Ironman, it's swimming, biking, and running. So there's three disciplines. I'm I'm always more smitten, I guess you can say, with running, just because that's what I've always done, and swimming and biking have been a little bit more newer for me, but that's a big area of improvement that I have. Like I can improve vastly more in those areas than most likely I can with running. So I've kind of set up four process goals for myself for the year. I didn't want to make like too many, but I also think these are fairly doable for myself. So the first one is in January, I'm going to really start to build up volume. And my goal is by the end of January to be able to be like consistently at about 10 hours per week of biking volume. So being on the bike for at least 10 hours a week consistently, kind of February, March, all the way through the summer, especially in the summer with a lot of riding. Just because to build that bike volume and to get used to it and get my legs used to that 112, because I think that's probably the biggest improvement that I can make in order to get me to a sub 12 time. Um, I'm also not the greatest swimmer, so I want to spend at least 3 days the week, 3 days a week in the pool or open water doing a swim workout at least 3 days a week. Um, and then I also want to make sure I get some form of strength training in 3 days a week as well. And then last but not least, it is my goal to average 7.5 hours of sleep a night. The research ranges from like 7 to 8 hours being beneficial. So I'm going to go right down the middle and go with 7.5. So that those are my process goals kind of leading in. And I think those are the ones that will probably have the largest effect on me being able to reach that big sub 12-hour Ironman goal that I have for 2024 overall.
That's awesome, Matt. Yeah, running is my first love too, so I totally understand the other ones taking a back burner, the side chicks that you just, can't get to as easily. You got that main one you just want to stick with. But I really like those. I like the idea of kind of assigning specific hours to, being in the saddle for 10 hours, sleeping for 7.5. Weight training, though, like what would be kind of the some of the parameters that you would set with weight training? That's kind of a generic um, process there. Would it be like with those three events? I know swimming obviously involves a lot of arms. Would it be more leg focused? Would it be more arm focused? Or how would you divvy up the weight training sessions?
It's probably going to distribute more towards the legs, but there's definitely going to be some arm in there as well to develop more power with the swim stroke. But my goal is to just be again consistent with strength. Um, I preach it a lot to runners, and I do a lot of strength training myself. But I feel like I can be more consistent and get myself to the point where I think a big goal of mine this year is to once I've kind of adapted, is to get myself to the point where I can do like low reps, higher weight. Because I've always been one to kind of go like, typical 2 to 3 sets of 10. But I think there's a lot of merit into going more on the strength route and trying to do lower repetitions, higher level of weight. And that's something I've never trained myself in. So I think it would be really interesting to kind of dive into that area a little bit more and to give that a try once my body has adapted a little bit more so I can start adding a little bit more variability to the mix with that.
Yeah, I like that. I like that idea. That's really cool. Building up that power a little bit more and those higher loads. I like the idea of that. Yeah, that's kind of now I'm getting all these different ideas for my goals and my process goals. One that I had thought of as well was just to focus a little bit more on speed work, just kind of consistently. And I will say that like the Big Bear Marathon is probably like like the top priority goal of
Hmm.
2024. And so just doing like consistent speed work throughout the year, I would say probably once a week, just doing at least like two 400s at maybe a 10K pace, just to keep up kind of those faster twitch muscles and kind of build up that lactate threshold a little bit more.
Hmm.
Um, and of course, strength training. I cannot forget the strength training. I feel like that's almost a given now. That's like the bread and butter, the foundation of the pyramid is just doing that strength training, and that's something I've really appreciated listening to in your podcast, Matt, is just getting that message out there of just how important strength training is. Ever since I've started doing it, I mean, I really haven't had any lower extremity injuries, knock on wood. So it's worked wonders for me, and I just really love that message.
It's a big piece of the puzzle for sure. And I always respect you for it because I know you're getting that strength training in because I see those workouts popping up on Strava all the time. And it reminds me that I need to kick it in gear and also get it in too. So that accountability is important.
Yes, I love Strava for that. Strava just gets me amped. I freaking love seeing people getting it in on Strava. I know we joked about that before, how I just like give everyone kudos on Strava. So if you want to be my friend on Strava, I will kudo you up. You will get so much, so much kudos from me. You won't even believe it.
It's true. I've been on the receiving end of many of those kudos, and it feels good. It feels good when somebody kudos your workout, no matter what it is.
Yeah, it keeps you going. It keeps you
Mm-hmm.
going.
Mm-hmm. 100%. You brought up Huberman before, Huberman Lab product podcast, and one of my favorite podcasts that I really like to listen to. And as I was listening to some of it this last week, a big topic that Huberman likes to talk about is dopamine. And I'm in, that neurotransmitter in our brain that kind of senses pleasure, and it's kind of how we, sense that a little bit. And I'm in no way a neuroscientist or anything like that that's expert, but just on my understanding of listening to the podcast, I think that relates to what we're talking about with goals too, specifically because dopamine works on more of an in anticipation of a goal. So we are, setting all of these goals for ourselves, no, especially our big goals of sub 12-hour Ironman, you and the Big Bear Marathon and the Century Ride, and our dopamine's going off because we're anticipating, accomplishing that goal. And it's important, I think, too, once we end this conversation, there's probably going to be a little bit of a dip in that dopamine. And sometimes that makes it hard to stay with it towards the goals, especially when they're long-term goals like Ironman isn't until September, over 9 months away. And so I think setting up these process goals is helpful for that too, because it gives you those little wins throughout the weeks. And it goes back to consistency yet again, being consistent week to week to week of like, oh, awesome, I hit my process goals. Oh, awesome, I hit them again. Look at that, a full month of hitting my process goals. And I think that goes a long way to feeling more motivated and feeling like you're actually accomplishing something instead of just having that one huge performance goal where you have to wait 9 months, to see 9 months or more to see if it actually plays out the way you want it to.
Yeah, yeah, it's so true. And that's why I love the kudos so much, is because it keeps you going. It gives you those little rewards throughout the day that um, just kind of keep you in the habit and keep you moving. And I think it's important too. One of the things that I found really interesting in those Huberman Lab podcasts was, I think the term was like goal gradients, where like we kind of push ourselves a little bit harder when we kind of see the end in mind. And so that's why having those kind of like smaller chunks, like a weekly goal as opposed to like a monthly goal, can be really handy because you're crossing that finish line, so to speak, every week instead of like having this huge long marathon. You have to have those little milestones that you can celebrate.
Hmm.
And I like to think of like the finishing kick that people get at the finish line. You know, they see that finish line and then they just like push it in. And so if you can kind of harness that same energy by having weekly goals or just having those like daily processes that you can follow, hopefully that's rewarding enough along with the kudos that you get on Strava to really build those habits.
Yeah, and going back to that James Clear quote, if you set up those really good processes, and and those process goals, and when you fall to the level of your systems, and those are, really high level systems that you have in place, you're going to be able to reach a lot of your performance and outcome goals that you may have set for yourself at the beginning of the year. So, I definitely think that's an important part of it, and like you said, it's those little things that go a long way to helping you achieve and feel accomplished and feel ready to tackle the race. And also too, if you're going into a race, we've been talking a lot about like how you're feeling. If you go into a race knowing that you absolutely crushed 9 months of your process goals and you are feeling really, really good, and you've done all the training, and that you left no stone unturned, and you were consistent and everything like that, you're going to feel really good and confident leading into that race. And that's going to help to boost your performance all on its own.
That's such an important piece. Yeah. I've definitely like I remember even thinking at grandma's like getting to the starting line and like looking at how high my heart rate was, just reflecting on like how tired I was like in the days leading up to it. Like I just mentally wasn't like there, and like knowing that maybe I had maybe overtrained and not quite tapered the best, and like my process was just kind of out of whack. That can really get in your head, especially in those like grueling middle miles where you're feeling just like trash, your legs are lead, you don't want to push yourself. So yeah, having that mental strength and having the having the like cookies in the cookie jar, as Goggins would say, making sure that you really put the money in the bank and it's there when you're ready for it. So I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, I agree. So yeah, I mean, I think those are three really good tips for setting up those athletic goals of like number one, setting up a, one or two, solid performance or outcome goals that you have for the year. Number two, making sure that they are lofty and that you really have to work to reach them, but they're still attainable. And number three, making sure that you're setting up really solid process goals to help you on the way. And I think that if you do those three things, and also, reflect on those as you're going throughout the year, I think you're setting yourself up for quite a lot of success with athletic achievements. And that can even go for a personal life, that can go for professional life, all of those different things too. So I think there's a lot of takeaway that you can take from those ideas.
Yeah, for sure. It doesn't just apply to running. I mean, all of these same things we're discussing are what I used to get through PT school and like studying for boards and just kind of all the trials and tribulations, even planning the move. I'm sure you've kind of used some of these tricks and tips when you were starting your business and getting going with the podcast. You kind of just have to take little nibbles and bites and try not to eat the whole candy bar all at once, because otherwise you'll throw up on yourself, like my anatomy and physiology professor used to say. He's like, you gotta just take little bites, otherwise it's gonna end badly.
I don't think I've ever heard that quote before, but I absolutely love it.
Oh man, yeah, that one stuck with me. Good guy, good guy.
That is awesome. That is awesome. Awesome, Noah. Well, what else do you have to add into the mix here? Any other thoughts?
Oh man, I don't think I have any right now. No, I'm just pumped to get going with things. This has definitely inspired me to reach out to a coach to put kind of the systems in place and reflect on just overall like fatigue and stress levels to make sure that I'm not overreaching and that I'm kind of finding that balance between grit and rest. Yeah, I'm just like ready for 2024 now. How about
Awesome.
you,
Yeah.
Matt?
I feel psyched up, and I think this is so important to have these conversations because, there were a lot of like organic things that, just came up, and that's why it's nice to have someone that you can have these conversations with, and that's why I respect the heck out of you, Noah, and I appreciate the accountability that you give me because having these conversations is really, really valuable for me, and it's nice that we were able to kind of broadcast this conversation, and I think that's so important to have that, have people that you can talk to about this type of thing, whether it is another runner that you run with, whether it's your coach, whether it's your partner, whoever it may be, having someone to chat through these processes and give you different ideas, give you different thoughts. I think it's just so impactful and so important to have for sure.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's cliche, but teamwork really does make the dream work. And the more people that you have to bounce ideas off of, the more perspectives that you can glean from other people, the more well-rounded you'll be, the more support you'll have, and the stronger you'll be overall. So I really
Mhm.
appreciate you having me on. I was super nervous to come on. Long time listener, first time podcaster here. But I really appreciate it. Another thing that I love about you, Matt, is that you always kind of push me to get outside of my comfort zone, which is another really important reason to have people like Matt in your life. Matt was actually the first person to encourage me to do a marathon back in PT school. I would not have done that if it weren't for him. I remember it was like during like a hell week, we had like, 50 exams and all these papers or whatever. And we also had this marathon and, we had trained for it. And it was like kind of a last minute decision for me because I was like, I don't want to spend all this time running when I should be studying. But Matt pushed me along and got me through it. And it was awesome. And here we are, like many marathons and Ironmans later. And I just wanted to say thank you, Matt, for always pushing me and encouraging me and uh yeah, getting me to do hard things.
Heck yeah, that's what it's all about. I still remember that vividly because I believe we ran the race on a Saturday and it was in like
Hmm.
late March, early April. So it was like a pretty cold marathon. And then we had a really big, I remember this vividly. We had a really big neuro exam on Monday. That was really
Hmm.
complex. So literally like probably 2 hours after we finished this race. I think I maybe went back and took a nap for like an hour or something. We were back at the library studying, and like all the next day we were back studying, which I don't recommend because we were just sitting in one place. And I remember us both trying to sit up from our chairs at the time, and it did not go well. Like we were stiff. We could not move. We could not walk. We were
Yeah.
getting looks.
Yeah.
It was not good. And so that motion is lotion. And we had to
Yeah.
study, of course. And so we had to stay there sitting. But yeah, that was a rough one, but we did it. And I'm pretty sure we did pretty well in that exam too.
Oh yeah, we crushed it. We crushed it. And
Hmm.
yeah, again, just having the buddy, like the buddy system. I just can't imagine like trying to study being so exhausted after running the marathon. And I do remember that. I remember like hobbling down the stairs, like our legs like super wide apart, just like trying not to bend our knees.
Yeah, we were
Um,
getting really weird looks too. I remember just people constantly like giving us side eye and everything like that. And what we really should have done is we should have wore our finisher medals to the
Oh
library
my
both of those
gosh.
days.
We earned it. That would have let them know. Then they would have just respected us instead of looking down on us and thinking we were weirdos.
That's for sure. Well, Noah, if people want to find you, follow you, whether it's, where are you, whether it's Strava, all of that good stuff, do you want to share where people can find you and follow you and give you some kudos?
Oh, yes. I love the kudos, love receiving them, but I really love giving them. You can find me. My name is Noah Bernhardt NoahBernhardt. And that's Strava. And then if you want, I guess you could follow my Instagram or my Facebook if you'd like. It's mostly just like hiking photos and stuff, which please join my followers, all like 100 of them. Would love to add another. Yeah, so would love to send some kudos and receive some kudos. And again, Matt, I really appreciate you hosting this and chatting with me. This has been really inspiring and really thought-provoking. Um, and I look forward to doing this again soon.
Awesome. Same goes for you, Noah. Like I said, I respect the hell out of you, and I appreciate that role you play in my life of always pushing me and being able to have these conversations too. So I really value that, and yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet, man.
All right, and with that, happy and healthy training, everyone. And yeah, hopefully everyone has a great 2024 and is empowered to set some really solid goals for the year. So we will chat soon.